The Vilcanota Sub-Global Assessment is being conducted in the Vilcanota mountain range of southern Peru. Located at the heart of the ancient Inca Empire, the amazing diversity of habitats and species provide invaluable ecosystem goods and services to the region's population. The region is a crossroads of complex environmental and socioeconomic problems. Its eastern reaches have been identified as a biodiversity hotspot, while the central area is a well-known microcenter of origin and diversity of food crops with a fast process of genetic erosion. The area constitutes the second most important glacier system in the Peruvian Andes, which is melting at unprecedented rates. It is also a sacred landscape, home to the most well-known sacred mountain of South America, Mount Ausangate. Global drivers of change, such as tourism, mining, and global warming, are changing plant and animal communities and threatening local livelihoods. Melting of glaciers is intensifying, and desertification in high-altitude areas is on the rise. The area is home to traditional Quechua indigenous peoples who are descendants of the ancient Incas. Quechua people revere mountains as places of sacred power and spiritual attainment, and the embodiments of their highest ideals and aspirations. Local people possess a rich traditional ecological knowledge about the mountain ecosystem. In spite of historical traumas which have impacted on indigenous peoples, they continue to recreate knowledge by maintaining an intimate connection to the natural environment. Cultural and spiritual values are embedded in the traditional knowledge system. Therefore, natural resource management is driven by people's beliefs and behavior. To the people of Vilcanota, spiritual values in particular are crucial for sustaining ecosystem services and local livelihoods. As environmental services are diminishing in the region, the spiritual dimensions of the local culture may become the most important mechanism to revert such crisis. Indigenous communities in the Vilcanota area are among the poorest in the country and often neglected in programs for education, health, and infrastructure. The area faces a growing emigration of males in search of employment in the cities, and thus much of the subsistence farming is now performed by women and children. Though communities have legal title to land, they do not have access to finance, extension services, or decision-making processes. The Vilcanota Sub-Global Assessment is directly involving the Vilcanota indigenous peoples in the assessment of their ecosystems and development of responses based on their priorities. To ensure that participation is full and effective, the Vilcanota Assessment initiated its work by testing how the application of the MA conceptual framework would work in this traditional setting. Preparatory work concluded that while the MA conceptual framework is being used effectively in various sub-global assessments, local assessments involving indigenous cultures in local settings will require at least some adaptations. Adapting the MA conceptual framework involves local learning groups, which are local platforms organized to analyze and study ecosystem phenomena. These groups are composed primarily by shamans and expert elders from the communities forming the sub-region. Village meetings and thematic workshops were carried out from November 2003 to March 2004 to analyze and test the validity of the MA conceptual framework to assess local phenomena and seek guidance for adapting it to the local cosmology and worldview. And as members from communities of the Potato Park trained a local MA team and helped to organize local learning groups and expert groups, as well as village meetings and workshops. During the process, the constitutive elements of Quechua knowledge and local traditional assessment methods were compared with the MA conceptual framework. This required discussion and reflection about the construct of Quechua traditional knowledge, namely of its epistemology, cosmology, nature of knowledge as a good, ontology, and accountability. A general meeting among all participating communities discussed the process and the progress of the work of adapting the conceptual framework. Further review of the resulting new conceptual framework was carried out by a review committee. The process had a built-in capacity building component, as the MA activities are also nurturing, enhancing, and utilizing the skills and capabilities of local people and their local institutions. Training a video team was also part of the exercise and intended to meet challenges of a local assessment undertaken by people with oral traditions, where multimedia applications are closer to their knowledge transmission models than written means. Video media can increase the ability of individuals, the community, and other local organizations to access, understand, and apply information and knowledge in a way that allows them to identify their problems and propose solutions. This training has been identified as critical for an effective participation of the local MA team in the full assessment phase of the Vilcanota subregion. A group of Quechua women from the Potato Park communities have been using video equipment and preparing videos of community activities. This group is training a video group in the Vilcanota area, helping to develop the skills of the Vilcanota group, and working in documenting the process of adapting the conceptual framework. The trained group will continue to document other components of the assessment during the full assessment process. Workshops and village meetings discussed how the Queros interact with their environment and how such interaction is governed by their worldview. The Vilcanota local assessment directly involves Quechua indigenous peoples in the assessment of the goods and services of their mountain ecosystems and their own well-being. Therefore, identification and assessment of phenomena of interest to us should be done through the lenses of our worldview. The worldview of the Queros has provided them with the ability to form and manipulate concepts, to plan and predict events, and communicate ideas. Our worldview defines our values, beliefs, attitudes, concepts, and behavior, and how our communities get organized socially to meet their material needs. The Queros see ecosystems not only as providers of food, shelter, fuel, clothing, household utensils, medicines, and materials for their artistic and aesthetic expressions, but also as gods, sanctuaries for wildlife, and their worship and religious ceremonies. Knowledge management reflects their complex ranked society, in which shamans play a major role. Intellectual property protection for the Quechua traditional knowledge is being developed following the Queros knowledge management systems. Given how local processes and worldview are defining the local Vilcanota assessment, the goal of developing a model of local assessment conceptual framework changed from its original objective of adapting the Quechua worldview to fit the MA conceptual framework to adapting the MA conceptual framework in order to fit the worldview of Quechua indigenous peoples. Nature for the Queros is an exercise of thought, where the taxonomical and cosmological imagination can fly as opposed to the ecological reductionism that denies any interrelation of nature to the symbolic and social field. Because of a shared epistemological construct with other indigenous peoples elsewhere, the resulting model can be useful to other native communities engaged in ecosystem assessment. The effectiveness of local assessments relays in the appropriate understanding of the interaction between people and their ecosystems. To this end, it is necessary that the MA process treats indigenous knowledge as valid and indigenous knowledge holders as equals. But above all, local assessments need to adopt a local worldview and understand and interpret the world from the local perspective. Given the failure of conventional conservation and development models in indigenous peoples' territories, the pluralistic nature of a globalized world, and the ecological interdependence between nations, modern and indigenous worldviews and knowledge systems must be integrated. The need to integrate the two systems to fully involve local peoples in the MA process remains one of the biggest challenges of the MA. People of Vilcanota believe that rainbow bridges need to be nurtured between diverse fountains of knowledge.